The Sword and Shield expansion pass is not only considered better than the base game, but it also turns Sword and Shield into a genuinely great Pokémon game, at least to some people. Pokémon DLC, just in concept, could either be something really good or really bad. We could forego having to buy a whole other game and just add more storylines or modes to what we already have. Or it could be Pokémon Tournament. $20. But Sword and Shield specifically getting DLC, that was dicey. No matter how you found base Pokemon Sword and Shield, lots of people found it bad. A lackluster story, not a lot of content, not great area design. So asking for more money for this game that many people saw as unfinished was a pretty ballsy move, I have to admit. But then the DLC finally came out. And it was actually really good. Sure, it doesn't exactly sit among the best of the Pokemon series, but it's fun, creative, has quite a bit to do, and it makes Sword and Shield as a whole better, in some cases expanding on what the original game refused to. I'm going to format this like I did when I talked about base Sword and Shield, just going through the game in order while stopping to elaborate on things as they come up and whatnot. So here we go again, I guess. Let's talk about Pokemon Sword and Shield's DLC. 5 years to... It hasn't been 5 years yet. Huh. Unless it's a completely separate campaign or something, adding DLC on top of an already existing game can be kind of tough to do organically. So, how do Sword and Shield go about it? Well, about as well as you can, really. Upon having the DLC installed, the Armor Pass and Crown Pass items will just be in your bag now. And with them, from Wedgehurst Station, you can go to the new areas as you please. And I really do mean as you please, because you can start the DLC as soon as you see the first cutscene in the wild area. By heading back to the station, you'll either see a strange man or my wife, alongside a Galarian Slowpoke you need to catch. And this whole sequence actually isn't connected to the DLC at all. It was just added in an update to sort of advertise it. And you see, you're forced to catch the Slowpoke here, but its evolution items are only found in the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra, so you'd better pay up. That's an evil mastermind move, well done. But yeah, you can start the DLC before you even start the gym challenge. The Crown Tundra can break the game, and we'll get to that. But the Isle of Armor actually has level scaling depending on where you are in the game. Barely. So if you were to do the Isle of Armor when it first becomes available, everything would be around level 10 to 20. So that's pretty cool. You essentially get to choose what path you take. But the thing is, those levels stay the same until after you do the Darkest Day, where they then jump to 60 to 70. So you're either doing the Isle of Armor as soon as it becomes available, or as post-game. No in between. The Teal Mask did this too, and it's a nice sentiment, and could be fun to shake up replays of the game, but most people are going to save it for post-game anyway, especially considering you'll probably end up over-leveled when returning to the main story. But it's also worth noting that when the Isle of Armor is supposed to take place is kind of a weird debate. So when you first see your new rival during the Slowpoke event, it's implied that they're going to the island for the first time. But then when you get there, suddenly it seems like they've been there for a while. And while this does line up with the real-life release timing of the Slowpoke event and the DLC update itself, it also causes a weird time pocket in canon, especially now since the DLC has been out. And no one on the Isle ever calls you champion, at least until way later, because you can do a solid chunk of the story without being it, but then you not being champion doesn't line up well with Avery or Klara's weird time gap. But the biggest question here is, does this matter? No. All the way back at Wedgehurst Station, we show our ticket and catch a ride to the Isle of Armor, which was actually 3 feet to the right the whole time. As soon as we arrive, we get the Isle of Armor's Pokédex, which is, well, not entirely brand new. There's a lot of overlap with mainland Galar, with only 102 new entries for this dex. But still, more Pokemon coming back is always a good thing. And if you don't want the DLC, that's fine. DLC or not, anyone can transfer those Pokemon in from home now. The DLC didn't fix the dex cut though, and even now after the Crown Tundra, 234 Pokemon are still missing from the game, but hey, it's something. A rather dashing lad comes into the train station, not only scaring this guy, but also acting as our guide. This is Avery, and he's a member of the dojo we're apparently joining. Man, I don't know, I just spent the $40 and now I'm here. Oh, he didn't like that answer. He also specifies he's an adult, so I'm not sure why he's feuding with a minor. You know, this is the best way to describe this rivalry. We step outside, and before we can really explore this place, Avery challenges us to a battle. His animations are really unique, the way he throws his Pokeballs, his really expressive and cartoony defeat animation, and it might actually tie into Avery's character, wink wink nudge nudge. And if you had Sword, you wouldn't experience any of that, since over there, Avery's replaced by Klara. For as cool as the gym leader swapping out was, and for as great as the gym leaders are in general, we still don't spend that much time with them, ultimately meaning the version exclusivity stuff really doesn't matter. So version-locked rivals with their own personalities and backstories are a bit scummy, but also really cool. They do both act pretty similar throughout the story and go through more or less the same arc, but they're still both their own people with distinct motivations. They even have unique battle themes, of which Klara's is infinitely better. Avery's just sounds like penis music to me. Anyway, we beat him pretty quickly because his team is this. This is enough for him to declare us a threat to himself, and he runs off. But not before giving us the style card though, how polite. It simply adds more customization options in clothing stores and salons, denoted by this icon. And more customization options are always nice. And I'm glad it's baked into this DLC instead of being a separate microtransaction. Say what you will about modern Pokemon, but at least they're not selling outfit packs or event Pokemon behind paywalls. It would have been so easy for them to charge $5 for the Azure Flute. And then there's Pokemon Go. Okay, now we're ready to explore the Isle of Armor. But for the love of God, don't do that yet, no matter how enticing that Wailord is. We head up the path just a bit more and find... Should I censor this? Turns out, this guy lost 150 Diglett alongside this one. Oh, subtle. And it's our job to find them. They hide in the ground all across the island, making for a pretty fun collectible despite how easy they are to miss. And the wild area was sorely missing something like this. Like, obviously having collectibles spread across an open area that aren't just Pokemon or items is an incentive to explore more. Though the wild area was a big flat rectangle, so actually I see why they didn't do that. The guy gives you a whole bunch of Alolan Pokemon after finding enough, and they all have their hidden abilities, so it's a pretty good incentive. But the Diglett just don't appear around the map until you talk to him for the first time. Now, luckily the path does lead directly into him, but if you commit the grave sin of having no water bike, you can very well explore the entire island before the Diglett spawn, completely wasting your time. Okay, now towards a new frontier. Oh hey, building. Yeah, despite being a completely open area, the Isle of Armor follows a pretty linear story. So for the sake of this discussion, we'll just see where that takes us for now. So Avery's out front telling lies about us, but luckily our mere presence shuts him down. This is Honey. And this is the dojo we're apparently joining. But Honey, the lady of the house, mysteriously doesn't have her name on her list. They weirdly bring that up a couple more times from here on out, but do nothing with it. Damn, justice for the student we replaced, he deserved better. Avery threatens to kill us with his psychic powers, and we're about to head inside before a weird creature appears on the roof. Oh yeah, now that's a shot for the trailer. We meet Honey's son Hyde in here, and he casually gives us an EXP charm that boosts experience gains. You know, they put this in the marketing for the DLC as a selling point. You think someone bought it because of that? But that's not all for Honey's family, because in the back, there's her husband and the dojo's master, Mustard. He's a fun character. According to his league card, he's a gamer. Finally, a character just like us. And he's also a pretty avid battler. I love just how casually he stands here, just doing a hand wave for his Pokemon to attack, not even in some snarky bead way. Mustard's just chilling. Though there is a small detail here that might hint towards his true power. When he sends his Pokemon out, the ball gets all stretched and distorted, as if there's a lot of strength behind that throw. It shows how powerful Mustard is, even when holding back. Damn, the small details like this really are where Sword and Shield excel. I am kind of surprised there's no battle background though, considering we're literally on a court. Now, lots of 3D Pokemon games do just have any indoor battles take place in a void, so I'm not surprised. It's just weird to not use the court is all. Apparently Mustard wasn't going all out, and yeah, I'd hope so, he used a Shinx. Anyway, we get rewarded with a dojo uniform and finally get given a reason to be here. If we complete 3 trials, we get the secret armor, of which this isle seems to be of. But before we get going, Avery mentions not having a uniform yet. That's fair, I'm not sure how the top hat fits the dress code. And right when he's about to receive it... The item sound cutting off is so silly, I love it. Actually, the Isle of Armor as a whole is weirdly really funny. Now, my sense of humor might just be borked. Well, it's Rick and Morty. But there's a lot more just comedy here than in the main game. Like, Avery and Klara's animations and expressions are way more cartoony than they really needed to be, and it's great. And a bit earlier in a cutscene, an NPC said something about the dojo's max capacity, and that really got me for some reason. In fact, the best way to describe the Isle of Armor story as a whole is that it feels like a for fun filler episode. It's only tangentially related to the main story, really doesn't add much to the lore, and is overall way more lighthearted. This is especially the case when compared to the Crown Tundra, which feels a lot more like an extension of Galar. Well, I guess it makes sense then that it is while the isle is just off to the side, huh? Back to the whole Avery thing. A horde of super fast Slowpokes steal his clothes, his uniform, and they're off. So it's mighty convenient that our first trial was to chase after them. But before we follow suit, we have some preparations to make. This ugly bike just isn't cutting it. So luckily, there's an NPC right outside the dojo who offers to customize your bike for free. You can choose either black or white, and they sparkle too. Wait, no, don't tell the theorists about this. And honestly, to risk getting ahead of myself, stuff like this is most of what the Isle of Armor adds. A lot of quality of life stuff and minor additions here and there. There's the aforementioned customization options and EXP charm, but there's also stuff like Digging Paw, a new NPC that gives you a copious amount of watts. Yes, they added a money printer. Other random NPCs that trade you for different regional variants of a given Pokemon. NPCs that show you a Pokemon's dex entry so you can track it down. And there's even someone who resets EVs back to 0, which is way easier than grinding out berries. Scarlet and Violet locked EV resets behind the DLC too. Why is this a theme? Sure, the new area, story, and returning Pokemon are the biggest things, but all this extra stuff, especially alongside the new moves a Pokemon can learn from a tutor, really make this feel like a 2.0 update, if that makes any sense. Now that leads into the discussion of whether or not Pokemon is pay to win, and yeah, but Raging Bolt's not important right now, we've got Slowpoke to catch. The three of them run around in the soothing wetlands, a big enough area for it to be interesting, but not so big as to make the chase tedious. It has a pretty cool visual identity too, being the wetlands. And is biking cheating? Well, we catch up to them, and they're slowpoke, so it's not hard to beat them. They do start the battle with a maxed out speed buff though, like this guy outsped Toxtricity. After getting Avery's uniform together, we head back to the dojo where it's only us, we're the first back. And Avery is once again flabbergasted, but everyone moves on to the second trial because, yeah, no, this wasn't fair. But since we did still win, we get rewarded with the choice of a Kanto Pokemon. Oh boy. I am glad they brought Bulbasaur and Squirtle back, especially after Charizard was in the base game with a new form and they weren't. Even if it kind of is just more pandering, I'm glad they're here. Despite already being in the file since day one, just completely inaccessible, but whatever. I do like the implication that this is where Leon got his Charizard though, considering he did train at the dojo. The fact that Charmander is conspicuously missing here, just another case of this game's shockingly excellent world building. But it also reveals that Leon's stupid because given the option, why wouldn't you pick Bulbasaur? Well, I do, and I name him Rashes. And right away, it's time for the second trial. Mustard wants max soup, so we're heading out to get max mushrooms. Though first, I want to see what Mustard's up to. Pokemon Quest. Hey, did you know Quest in China kept getting updated for a long time and is only just now closing its servers? Like, what the hell? I want Mecha Mewtwo. But more importantly in this room hides Cramomatic. This is ultimately just another one of those quality of life editions, but it's still pretty neat. You put in 4 items to get a new item, be it a TR, held item, or even if you put in the returning Apricorns, a rare Pokeball. These balls were in the base game, but nearly impossible to get. But now it's slightly less impossible, even though I don't know why you'd want to use a Safari Ball. We depart first, taking us through the Forest of Focus. And right off the bat, this place visually is really busy, at least compared to most of the open areas. So busy, in fact, that it causes the game to very noticeably chug. Not Scarlet and Violet levels, but it's really jarring considering how the game usually runs fine. And the visuals do not warrant that even remotely. Yeah, the Isle of Armor as a whole is more visually varied than the wild area, and it's a fair bit more vibrant too, which is nice. But lots of the wild area's graphical issues also apply here. When the weather's bad, it just doesn't look good at all. The textures are shockingly low resolution, especially in the Forest of Focus, just making everything look more photoshopped in. And the pop-in, well, that's on a technical level, so I don't really know how the DLC could have fixed it. It's even worse here, with foliage just spawning as you move. The isle as a whole does still have a very distinct visual identity from the wild area, and I'd argue it has even higher highs. The sunsets here are gorgeous, but it's not always as gorgeous as it deserves to be, you know? Well, at least they made the trees look better. Anyway, after that, in a shortcut through the training lowlands, which are uneventful, we find ourselves in Warm-Up Tunnel where the mushrooms are, and also where the Avery are. Is it safe to say that the Isle of Armor's trials feel more like you're competing against people than the gym challenge does? At least in a sense. With the gym challenge, we know that there are a whole bunch of challengers, but aside from our main rivals, we hardly even see any of the other ones. Aside from in gyms where they're just kind of chilling, outside of Spikemuth where there are 2 of them, and the post-game tournament rematches where you're already the champion. But here, and during the Slowpoke chase, we do get to see and talk to a bunch of students around the island. It's just one of those details that adds to the experience. But of course, our main competition is Avery, who says his psychic powers picked up on the mushrooms first. You know, I believe him, considering said powers can also apparently kill us. I let him have them to keep myself safe, but then he starts getting really upset. See, both Avery and Klara are pretty over-the-top characters, being another step up for the jerk rival trope, going from Beat's massive ego to also having a massive ego and wanting to kill you. But they're not just one-note characters, they have a lot of their own stuff going on. Even if a chunk of it is found on the league cards and nowhere else, though they aren't as bad as Marnie was, since they still have a clear arc without them, and are also proper characters. Avery and Klara both share a goal to become a gym leader, psychic and poison type respectively, and now they're at the dojo to train for it. But how they both got to that point was completely different. Avery comes from a family of psychic gym leaders, so naturally he's next in line. But his psychic powers were considered pretty weak, only being able to levitate things. He was mocked, called a disappointment. And even while training as a gym trainer, he'd start levitating anyone that beats him thanks to his low self-esteem, getting him kicked out. Then he fell into depression, as you do, and finally found himself going to the dojo to get stronger. That's why he's so scared of you taking the spotlight away from him. At the dojo, he's free from all the judgment and finally feels like he's worth something. Now, I'm not justifying this behavior because he is still an ass, but he has depth and his own reasons for what he does. And some of his manners of speaking might tie into this too. He brings up age a lot, probably because he knows that's one thing he definitely has over you.
Did you see? An event's happening right now. Look at us. Go!
Well, you are a child.
And Klara is Sunshine and Rainbows in comparison. She started out as an underground pop singer, but she really wasn't that popular, with her league card, for whatever reason, deciding to point out that her debut album only sold 8 copies. I mean, I bought one. So she thought that becoming a gym leader would make her more popular, but that was too much work, so she quit. Thus, she went to the dojo thinking it would be easier. And to risk maybe skipping a bit too far ahead, both of their arcs resolve in a pretty similar way too. With you, the player, being just the motivation they need to give it their all. I don't think Avery's quite at his all yet because we beat him pretty easily and take the mushrooms for ourselves. And according to Honey on the phone, we're winning again. It's the bike, I'm telling you. But before we make our way back to the dojo, I can't wait anymore. I need that Wailord. Wow, this thing's massive. Oh, god damn it. I mean, I expected this, and I do understand it to a degree, especially with Dynamax Pokemon being fully and properly scaled just wouldn't really work. But then why put this here at all? It very directly showcases a problem that lots of people had with this game. Maybe it was some kind of test for fully scaled Pokemon in the overworld? But it's like the Pierce scene in the sense that it does nothing but showcase an issue that lots of people have with the game. Again, why is it here? Oh, that's why. Say hello to Eternatus too. Alright, now we head back, and we're still the only person to find max mushrooms, aside from Avery. And this next moment is just really sweet all around. He comes in clearly exhausted and earnestly asks without a hint of snark for Honey to use his mushrooms in the max soup. And while there's a chance this is a devious scheme to get more popular at the dojo, it doesn't really seem like that. He gets genuinely emotional about finally succeeding. He put the effort in and he got the praise, exactly what he's been working towards. And Klara's version of the scene is the exact same, but it still works with her character, with this being the first time she's really tried at something. With that heartfelt moment, the whole family sits down to enjoy some max soup. And this bit's up there with Sorry to Bug You While Your World's Expanding. Game funny. But more importantly, we now have access to max soup, so with 3 max mushrooms, we can enable our pre-existing Pokemon to Gigantamax. And oh boy, does this feel like a band-aid fix on a broken limb. So in base Sword and Shield, the only way to get a Gigantamax Pokemon is if it's already like that, be it from a raid or even gift Pokemon like the Charmander Leon gives you. This also had the side effect of implying that some characters like Nessa just have 2 of the same Pokemon for some reason. With the max soup though, we can give Gigantamax to the Pokemon we already have, including our starters now, so bam, there's Afton. But this really shouldn't be locked behind a paywall. Gmax starters? Sure. I don't think the ultimate form of your starter should be locked behind DLC, but it's new content, so fine. But being able to Gigantamax your Pokemon that already have Gigantamax forms? That should be a given. Your bond with them doesn't matter. They flat out cannot reach their maximum potential unless you spend the $40. And that's not to mention a few cases of event-only Gigantamax Pokemon. Pikachu and Eevee are locked behind having Let's Go save data on your Switch for one, and Toxtricity, Snorlax, and Meowth were exclusive to certain raid events for quite a while, thus making getting them through soup some people's only option. Now, admittedly, thanks to the current quote-unquote raid event going on, getting them now isn't an issue, or at least it won't be until the server shut down, but it shouldn't have ever been an issue. Plus, there's a case of Melmetal. This thing just can't eat max soup despite having a Gigantamax form, so the only way to get that is by linking Pokemon Home to Pokemon Go and getting a mystery gift. Why? Some people say it's because the Meltan family only eats metal, but Citrus Berry called, pick up the fucking phone. The simple addition of this soup just makes Gigantamax feel that much more tacked on as a feature. I guess it could simply be considered another one of the quality of life editions, but the DLC only soup being such an integral part to the game's main gimmick, it just makes Gigantamax feel that much more like, say it with me now, missed potential. But right now, more importantly, there's only one trial left. The final, last, ultimate third trial to be specific, being a one-on-one between us and Avery. With the victor getting the dojo's secret armor, it all comes down to this. If Avery triumphs, he'll finally realize his dream and become a psychic gym leader. Even he's doubting himself here. Whereas if we win, we win. Reminder, we're not even supposed to be here. But there's no point in stalling, so we head out back to the massive battle court to start our showdown. And with the whole dojo watching, Avery's playing dirty, setting up psychic terrain before the battle even starts. It doesn't really make him that much more challenging, like he has a Ponyta, but it's still a neat thing to spice up this battle, showing just how desperate he is to win, while still being very Avery about it. And of course, with another fantastically fluid and expressive animation, he finishes out by Dynamaxing his Slowbro. And in Sword, fighting Klara, the sequence is mostly the same, except she automatically sets up Toxic Spikes, making her fight quite a bit harder, and when she Dynamaxes, she winks at the camera. Anyway, as we were. After we beat Avery, he doesn't act like he usually would. He pulls a hop and slips into a depression. He gives up, even after trying dirty tactics in the trials, battle, and before we even knew what the dojo was, he couldn't win. With Klara too, the one time they finally try and give it their all, they still don't succeed. But this time, we won't let them back down just yet. Mustard does know what Avery did, but lets him off easy. All he has to do is look after the dojo's Pokemon for 6 months. 6 months. 6 months. Avery gives us his league card. I think it's safe to say that we're friends now, and that's that. Avery and Klara's arcs are both great, but man, they don't last long at all. Now, that's not their fault, with this DLC being pretty short in general, and their screen time was used well, being likable characters with an arc that has a start, middle, and end. And this will be the final time I mention Marnie. But it still would have been nice to see them in the spotlight just a little bit longer, especially considering we're only about halfway done the Isle of Armor. Okay, well, technically their arc isn't done quite yet. They are still staying at the dojo, and by looking at the evolution of their standard league cards to their rare ones, we can see that they're finally truly putting effort into improve themselves. And I guess seeing this is more than we got for Bede. He just decided to spawn in Fabulous one day. Now, Avery's story might be done, but we're not. We have armor to get. This cutscene's great. This guy's movements are so bouncy and exaggerated. And this guy's name is Kubfu, the secret armor we've heard so much about and also the bane of competitive play. Welcome to the team, Sauce. To help Sauce overcome his anxiety, we're going on a little sightseeing tour of the island, i.e. a perfect chance to explore. But that's not all we get to do. Kubfu can't exactly tour the island while it's in its Pokeball, so finally, after all this time, we can let our Pokemon follow us again. Everyone loves this feature, so I can't wait to... Yeah, it's not a hot take to say the following Pokemon are poorly implemented in this game, right? They use the same movement speed they do in Pokemon Camp, which does not pair well with your movement speed. Almost all the Pokemon are either way too slow, so they can't keep up and just keep popping back in behind you, which gets old real quick, or they're too fast and they catch up to you, stop, catch up, stop, and some Pokemon just don't play nice with the camera. I love you, Screech, but I also cannot see. Some people try to counter these issues by saying stuff like, oh, so you want them glued right behind you, or if a slow Pokemon went fast, it would be weird. And this isn't even considering how they got rid of all those cute, unique interactions you could have with your Pokemon. Like, they used to be able to do little dances or even give you items. Here, they can only do one emote. And I don't want anything to do with a Pokemon that doesn't give me material things. It is nice that the feature's here, and it's still decently charming, but it's a shame that it just wasn't done very well. Especially since there is a 3D game that did it perfectly. Consider Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. No, seriously, please consider them. They're actually really good games. Let's Go implemented following Pokemon in a 3D space exactly how they should be. Every Pokemon moves at a consistent speed to keep up with you, and it works fine. They keep a decent distance, not being tied to your back, but also not being way too far behind. And some might even run ahead of you, showcasing just how eager or excited they are. The unique interactions are all still there, and actually, there is one Pokemon that can fall behind. It's just Slowpoke, but since this is the only one, it's actually funny and not whatever this is. Oh, and Let's Go also had reasonable hitboxes. I didn't know Cinderace was a Magnezone. But there's a more important matter at hand, that being the Isle of Armor. And this is what the wild area should have been, flat out. Not only is the map bigger, but it's also just way more varied. I've already mentioned the soothing wetlands and Forest of Focus being infinitely more unique than any one part of the wild area. And there's also stuff like Loop Lagoon, a really nice alcove lake area with an island in the middle, Challenge Road, a more mountainous path, actual caves to explore and pass through. And see this map? See this ocean? You can go across almost the whole thing to find a couple islands. And more than a couple Sharpedo. Oh, come on, man, stop, please leave me alone. This place also has some infinitely more interesting landmarks, like Honeycomb Island with its unique shape, Loop Lagoon with its unique shape, and these two towers we can't access yet. There's also just some lanterns and flags scattered around some places, and they really don't mean much, but they make the isle feel a lot more alive and lived in, which is good considering it is indeed lived in. I do get why the wild area didn't have stuff like this. It's a wild no man's land, like who would set things up, the Sneasel? But something like this sure would have made it feel a lot less empty. The area design in general is just way better too. The wild area, as fun as it can be to run around in, is really just a route, but wide. It's a straight shot with a definitive beginning and end, and also Motostoke in there. But here, there really is no start or end, unless you count the station or something. Everything here is interconnected and it's wonderful. We had to go through the Forest of Focus and that had multiple entrances and exits, but if you have the water bike and want to skip part of the forest, you can just go across the river here. Or you could follow the river through this cave and end up back in the Fields of Honor where the dojo is. You could enter the Brawler's Cave from the soothing wetlands and either follow it up to the mountain area or take it out to the sea. It has such a pure feeling of exploration that honestly, I don't even think Scarlet and Violet match. I love Scarlet and Violet in spite of its Scarlet and Violet-isms. But Sword and Shield's open areas feel a lot more involved to explore. The isle's design is so intricate and you can't fly over anything either, making every part of it feel a lot more important. I would honestly love a whole Pokemon game just in an area like this. And it's also worth noting, just like mainland Galar, the Isle of Armor is directly based on a place in the real-life UK, being the Isle of Man. But compared to Galar's rich culture directly pulled from Britain, the Isle has practically nothing. In real life, the Isle of Man is an actual place with history where people live. But in the Pokemon world that we all live in, it was just a deserted island as part of Galar that Mustard bought. Kind of a bummer when going from Galar's, again, excellent culture to practically nothing. Hell, if anything, the Isle of Armor takes more cues from Chinese culture. But hey, that's still cool.
I just didn't think it would be Chinese.
But regardless of the inspiration, Sauce has still been having a great time on this tour, checking out all the sites. Oh man, what a view! You talk to the dojo students in certain areas to get these scenes, which is kind of a pain when you can't see them from a distance. But we do it! Sauce and I are best friends now, and Mustard shows us our final challenge to bring Sauce to his true potential. The Towers of Two Fists. We get to take on one of them, and depending on which we choose, Sauce here will evolve into one of two forms, both of which being equally destructive. If we choose the Tower of Waters, Sauce becomes a water type. If we choose the Tower of Darkness, it'll be a dark type. Well, I prefer water anyway, so let's go with that. Okay, only Kubfu can be in our party. I don't know why they can't just automatically remove everyone else, but there. Now we're ready to... If you've raised Kubfu to level 70, its training should go smoothly, huh? Well, there is one teeny tiny problem with that. See, we received Kubfu at level 10, and it's not like we could really level it up naturally while exploring since the wild Pokemon are level 60, mind you. They did not know what they were doing for balancing in this DLC. Given the level of Kubfu and the Kanto starters we get being level 5, it seems like the intended way was to do the DLC before the main story. But if you did that, you just end up way over leveled until after the 3rd gym. I guess they intended you to get Kubfu, go do part of the gym challenge, and then come back? That probably makes the most sense, being the most effective way to level up Kubfu in the first place, but that's still really clunky and just doesn't work at all when you're doing it as post-game. But complaining isn't going to level Sauce up, so it's time to grind raids for EXP candies. And I need Watts for witching pieces for the raids, come on man. Though I guess the Watts are a surprise tool that'll help us later. I think I might be ready. The inside of the towers have a really neat aesthetic, very reminiscent of the ones in Johto. Person who's only played Pokemon seeing a tower. It's not hard, partially because Sauce is level 87, but like, they're using Krabby, Psyduck. The Meryl was a bit tougher, I guess, but that's just because she had the type advantage. The music here is good at least, with both towers even having their own slightly different version of the same song with the instrumentation changing between them. Kinda like Reshiram and Zekrom's battle theme. The theme keeps playing uninterrupted between every battle too, making it feel a lot more climactic and grand. As grand as the whole thing really can be. Well, look who's on the last floor. Mustard's the final obstacle between us and total competitive domination, so it's time for one final showdown. Yeah, that's pretty sick. He's using another Kubfu here with a Focus Sash, so it takes marginally longer to take out. We still take it out. Hey, Sauce seems to feel pretty accomplished, though. We also get the reveal that not even Leon made it this far, getting lost on the way to the towers. Put him in an IKEA just to see what happens. Anyway, Kubfu's growth is now complete, and by studying the Scroll of Waters, he finally evolves into an Urshifu. Though actually, if you have Kubfu holding an Everstone, Mustard will take notice and allow you to just not evolve it. And no matter what you choose to do, the story kind of cuts there. It's not quite totally done, and we'll get to that, but the meat of the Isle of Armor storyline is over, and man, Pokemon DLC stories aren't very long, but they should be longer. Mustard congratulating Kubfu's growth really doesn't have the impact it should. We met 2 hours ago, and for 1 hour of that we were grinding. Now, it was still a fun time, but not unlike the Indigo Disc, really, it never felt like it reached its fullest potential, story-wise at least. But we're not totally done with the Isle of Armor just yet. We still have a lot of Watts left over from our grinding session there. So it's a good thing Honey can help us out. After the 3rd trial, you can donate Watts to upgrade the dojo. It's mostly small additions like a hairstylist in the dojo, some free curry ingredients, a PC, even though you can access your boxes anywhere, so the only use for this is doing Pokejobs, and why are you doing Pokejobs? You can even unlock a vending machine that sells the EV items for cheaper than they usually are. Once again, 90% of this DLC is quality of life stuff. The last 3 rewards, though, are the most interesting ones, with you getting her league card at 800,000 total donated, a full-on battle with her at 1 million that's actually decently challenging, her throwing animations of all things are a highlight, whipping the ball with so much force that it completely distorts, and when Dynamaxing, she casually whips the ball full force with one hand, really displaying her true strength. Hell, even the guy from way back at the station who was supposed to join the dojo before us, he shows up here saying he found a new dojo called the Wild Dojo, and Honey promptly beats him up. The lore here runs deep. Doesn't excuse the tease of past champions, though, almost 5 years out and I'm still mad about it. And at 3,280,000, you get to go on a walk with her and get her rare league card. Not necessary to do in the slightest, especially considering the absurd grind for Watts, but I guess more content's more content? And speaking of more content, if you happen to have finished base Sword and Shield's postgame, you can start the final stretch of the Isle of Armor story just by returning to the dojo. Kinda weird how after the tower it just cuts off with no indication of what you should do next, especially if, again, you're doing this before the postgame, but that really doesn't matter too much, especially considering, oh, well, look who it is. Hop is visiting the Isle to do more research on Dynamax, as he says. And man, I am so glad they didn't just forget about him being Sonia's assistant now. It would have been so easy to revert him to being all battle hungry, but no, his character development does carry over. Hoppykins. As it turns out, Sauce isn't quite done growing yet. Get it? Like the Pokemon turn big? This guy can Gigantamax too, though just eating max mushrooms won't work since it apparently hates the taste. So Hop and I are tasked with finding the certain something to make the taste tolerable. And we don't know what the certain something is, but we do know that it comes from another Pokemon. So thank God Hop's here because he apparently did research on Urshifu somehow, and they tend to love sticky honey. So then Hop decides to go look for nectar from plants. This guy's working for the head of science in this region. He wants to race us to the Forest of Focus, as he usually would do, and we soon follow. Or I thought we followed, but he's not here? Oh wait, my bad, he's actually at this entrance. Sure wish the map would have told me that. As cool as the Isle of Armor is as a big, open, explorable area, the map just doesn't work with it at all, or any of the open areas for that matter. The visual style is pretty nice. Very simplistic as with the rest of the game's UI, but it's still mostly functional and pretty charming. But the map markers for either you or the objective don't actually point to where you or the objective are, instead just pointing to the area that you or it is in, which can lead to quite the disconnect. Now, in mainland Galar, that's a non-issue. The wild area is not only super linear, but you also never really have to do anything in it, and as for the routes, if you get lost in these, go seek therapy. But in the Isle and later the Crown Tundra, where there are objectives that you need to go to specific points to do, the map crumbles in on itself not being designed around stuff like that, ultimately making the game just that tiny bit more tedious. Now the game still works fine, this is the definition of a nitpick, but like even leaked betas of the game at least had a mini-map. It wasn't totally functional in those betas, and it showed a map of Akala Island for some reason, but this probably would have helped at least a little bit. Anyway, we do end up finding Hop, and he makes an offhand remark about him and Sony splitting up for research, with her choosing to go somewhere cold. Like a tundra, perhaps. Either a Lilligant or an Applin should have what we're looking for, so it's pretty convenient we find a Petalil right in front of us. The little thing's lost, and since it thinks Hop's its mom, we've got to go find one of its real parents.
Mama Luigi?
Now, I do like how this plays into Hop realizing he loves helping people in Pokemon now, but at the same time, something like this would have worked infinitely better in the main game instead of after his arc's complete, but that's the Sword and Shield way! We end up finding a Lilligant a bit deeper in, and of course, we're taking it back to their kid. But the weird thing is, instead of just fading to black and warping us back to Hop like this game, or let's face it, most Pokemon games would usually do, we do actually have to escort Lilligant back. It's hardly a proper escort mission though. You can just walk it back to Hop, no problem. Now, if you get too far ahead with the bike, it will get stuck, making you go back for it. But as neat as the moment is, it's pretty inconsequential. And this is the only time something like this happens in the game. Hell, the whole main series. Aside from that one lady's house in Black and White 2, I guess. Stop yelling at me! Anyway, we reunite the two, and it is indeed very sweet. And as thanks, Lilligant gives us some nectar. Somehow. Hop drinks it, Courtney called, she wants her bit back, and it's not what we're looking for. So maybe Applin will work better. It doesn't. It climbs up a tree, falls back down on our head, which we don't get to see, of course, and it leaves. Boy, this story's going a million miles a minute. It did get some apple juice on our head though, but since apple juice is not honey, we need to keep looking. And only after seeing a Venipede walk by, Hop's neurons start to fire off and he finally realizes, oh, we need honey from bees. This whole quest especially gives off filler episode vibes. We get the option to make fun of him, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. We've got to find a Vespiquen, and our best bet is to look at the island shaped like a honeycomb, called Honeycomb Island. Yeah, we probably should have checked there first. We arrive there after a simple trek across the sea, and before long, Hop's power spot detector that he has starts going off towards the big tree in the center. And as we've done with trees before, we shake it. And this cutscene is widely seen as another laughingstock, right up there with Rose, but for completely different reasons. It's trying to be all action-packed and intense, but it's in-game with the canned animations instead of being, you know, animated, so the camera's just zipping around to simulate movement. But it's really not that bad, it's like 15 seconds long, and at the end we get pulled into a raid battle by a mysterious force. And by we, I mean me. Hop's just chilling out there, I guess. Well, there's the Vespiquen. It's a decent challenge, mainly because it's a Dynamax Pokemon at level 80, but we beat it before long and get the Max Honey. Funnily enough, Max Honey isn't even a key item or anything. No, if you want to Gigantamax another Urshifu for some reason, you have to grind out raid battles specifically against Combi or Vespiquen. It's just a bizarre choice, but hey, at least now Melcombi can do something. And we head back to the dojo. With everything else done, Mustard invites us to the battle court for one final showdown. And you know, I haven't talked about his character much in depth yet, but I wish I was him. He's so enthusiastic to do stuff at the dojo. I love his personality in battle. He's living his best life and he knows it. His league cards tell us some neat stuff too. 50 years ago now, after defeating Opal, he became the champion of the region, and he held that spot for 18 years until his partner Pokemon presumably passed away, sending him into a losing streak. The chairman, whether Rose or someone else, tried to rig a game into his favor, but Mustard didn't want that, so he retired to form the dojo. And since he has a family, he can join the ranks of Pokemon fathers that aren't a total piece of garbage. But my admiration of Mustard is irrelevant in battle, so with Urshifu all souped up, we head on out back to finish this for good. He has a pretty strong team, not just level-wise either. It's a good Pokemon selection with proper strategy at play. Setting up Stealth Rocks, having Body Press on Corviknight, and of course, to finish off, he sends out his own Urshifu being the opposite of whatever one you chose. Complete with a fantastic Dynamax animation like he's throwing a Kamehameha. We finish it off with one of the most anime-looking moves in the series. Seriously, why can't more moves look like this? Get a hearty congratulations from everyone, including Avery, and with one final ominous line from Mustard that may or may not be foreshadowing, we head back inside with the rest of our newly found dojo family. Sure, it's short, but the Isle of Armor's storyline is still a fun time. Mustard, Avery, and Klara are great characters, bonding with Kubfu's really cute. Klara's really cute, and despite it only lasting for like 15 minutes, it's nice to hang out with Hop again. But the appeal here isn't necessarily the story itself, it's the variety in the story. Of course, there's the Isle of Armor with its different biomes and terrain. The stuff we're doing in the story is constantly changing, from chasing down Slowpoke to touring the entire area. It's just very consistently engaging, and the best way I can really describe the Isle of Armor DLC as a whole would be refreshing, especially when coming right from how repetitive base Sword and Shield is. In the grand scheme of things, it's nothing crazy. Hell, a lot of the appeal really does just come from the quality of life additions and competitive stuff. Like, Grassy Glide is a selling point for this thing, though there is still a tiny bit of post-game content here, but content might be a strong word. By going to Pot Bottom Desert, you get a small scene of your rival training up another Slowpoke, which may or may not become important later. This is where you get their rare league cards, also unlocking their obligatory rematches back at the dojo. And very rarely, some gym leaders might show up on the island just because, and it's fun to see them. That's the extent of their involvement here. And on top of that, there's even a new battle facility of sorts in the form of restricted sparring. And it's pretty unique. You choose one type of Pokemon to bring in and try to go for 5 wins. But alongside being a monotype challenge, your Pokemon also don't heal in between battles. You have the option to fully heal your team twice, but otherwise you've got to tough it out. It's a good challenge and also a great concept, almost like something you'd see at a battle frontier, albeit very watered down. But yeah, overall, the Isle of Armor is a pretty great piece of DLC, even if part of that just comes from Sword and Shield getting more content which it desperately needed. Oh wait, this entire time I forgot to mention the theme of the Isle of Armor. Much like base Sword and Shield and its theme of strength, the Isle of Armor also has a theme which, according to the developers, is growth. And it was accomplished pretty well on quite a few levels. The constant of training and growing stronger, Avery and Klara growing as people, the dojo growing closer as a family. All the while the Crown Tundra has what, exploration? Yeah, that's what we've been doing. Get with it. In October of 2020, we got Pokemon Sword and Shield's final chapter in the form of the Crown Tundra. The second part of the expansion pass that's not only very different from the Isle of Armor, but also pretty different from any Pokemon game we'd seen before. Almost, in a sense, laying the groundwork for Legends Arceus. And also, unlike the Isle of Armor, which is more of an expansion to the gym challenge part of Sword and Shield, the Crown Tundra expands a lot more on the lore of the region. You know, the part of the base game that felt like it needed 5 rewrites. And on top of all of this, the Crown Tundra is considered one of the best Pokemon experiences, ever by some people. Now, I don't know how that can be the case when Chatot still isn't in the game, but I suppose we'll see. We start it the exact same way we do the Isle of Armor, from Wedgehurst Station, and it was just south of the region the whole time. Even just looking at Galar's map, pre and post DLC is crazy. It looks so much more complete, like a big world begging to be explored. A year after the game came out. Of course, this DLC added even more Pokemon back into the game, so naturally we get another Pokédex to complete. Only 74 brand new entries this time though, but that is partially made up for by there being a sizable handful of Pokemon that just aren't in the dex, but in the game. Though these mostly come from a certain brand new feature, so it makes sense. And there's also Whelmer here who is in the wild, but not in the dex. I don't know why they did that. And I didn't mention it earlier, but you do get rewards for completing both the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra Pokédexes. But they really feel a lot like an afterthought. The Isle of Armor gives you a Crown cosmetic. Hooray! But more importantly, the Mark charm, making it more likely that a wild Pokemon will have a mark. Not quite shiny charm levels of enticing, but still pretty neat. And the Crown Tundra has another crown, alongside 50 rare candies and 3 gold bottle caps. So in other words, they ran out of ideas. But you still wouldn't want to miss out on that certificate, right? Well, we step outside, and right away we're hit with a familial argument. I didn't really think it was my business, but apparently it is because we're called over by Nia. Though I don't really see the Gormott in her. And she wants our help getting her dad Peony off her back. He's just being overly affectionate and thinks that a battle should liven his daughter right up, so battle we do! This applies to like half of Galar's population at this point, but his battle theme is really, really good. A jazzy trainer battle theme is incredible just on concept alone, so it's a shame we only fight him once. And I also think this is a good time to mention the scaling in the Crown Tundra, because there is none. You can access it from the very start, even before doing the Isle of Armor. But unlike over there, where you'd be dealing with Avery's level 12 Slowpoke, which is perfectly manageable, your first battle is instead against a level 70 Copperajah and Aggron, and the wild Pokemon around here range from 60 to 72. Now, it's not a challenge for us, especially considering Urshifu, but it's still a really cool option to have. It really gives off that feeling of wandering somewhere you're not supposed to be in an open world game. And not only does this mean you can explore a solid chunk of the Crown Tundra before even getting your first badge, sadly Victor and Gloria can't swim, so you do need the water bike for some parts, but this is also instrumental in breaking the game's progression. That'll become apparent in a minute, but for now, Peony's daughter ran off. Well, at least he has one left. Apparently, he took her out here on a father-daughter trip, but she's more interested in checking out the Max lair, so Peony naturally follows. Man, I hope we see him again. I do want to say though, the first impression we're given of the Crown Tundra, the area itself, isn't ideal. This starting portion here is way more closed in than the Isle of Armor and heck, even the wild area. Now that is totally the intent here with it opening up a lot more later. And I'll say it now, the area design is light years ahead of the wild area once again. But the theming. Mainland Galar already had plenty of snowy areas with routes 9, 10, and Sirchester. And going straight from that stuff at the end of the main game to what's essentially post-game content with the exact same theme, it's just not very exciting, especially compared to what we've seen before. Plus, the way the open areas tend to look don't really do the snow any favors. Though we can't get too ahead of ourselves about the map, there's still an entire this left to explore. By walking for about 5 seconds, we see Peony again, and he calls us into the max lair, so who am I to say no? Nia's somewhere down there, and the scientist isn't letting Peony run after her since it's too dangerous. Well, surely a nifty tutorial will smooth things over. It doesn't, and after some insulting words from the scientist here, don't you ever compare Peony to that man again. We're ready to go on our very own Dynamax adventure, the thing people remember most about the DLC. Dynamax Adventures are kinda like this game's equivalent to Oras's Rings, Snacksworth, or probably most appropriately, the Ultra Game's Ultra Warp Ride. There are tons of Pokemon to catch here, including the Hoenn starters for some reason, but of course, it's all the returning legendaries that are the main attraction. A Dynamax adventure is essentially a series of 4 raid battles back to back, with you being able to choose where to go next on this map here. And to make the choice easier, you might just catch a glimpse of a Pokemon's silhouette. Okay, what the hell is this? Now, 4 raid battles might sound like hell on earth considering how slow they are, but the developers had the foresight to make these ones in the lair specifically not as bad. The Pokemon never put up those stupid shields anymore, and if you choose to catch them, the animation is shortened significantly. You do still lose if your team faints 4 times though, and that's in total, so it's really fun making it all the way to the legendary before Hiker David makes a brain-dead play, completely wiping all your progress! What's stopping you from just plowing through this with your own buffed up Pokemon? Well, the NPCs of course are still themselves, but more importantly, you're forced to use Rento Pokemon. There's even a lore reason for that, with them apparently being engineered to withstand the lair's Dynamax energy better, and that's just kinda cute. You get a random set to choose from when you start the adventure, and anytime you catch a Pokemon, you have the option to swap it. Though these rentals aren't exactly the most ideal. Not quite stadium rental levels like Tail Whip, but they're still bizarre. Like Barraskewda is one of the fastest Pokemon here, but it also has Assurance that'll probably never get the damage buff. And there's Bisharp who has Metal Sound to lower the enemy's special defense, but it doesn't know any special moves itself. I guess you're supposed to strategize and synergize with your team, but as we know, with the NPCs that is not happening. And even if you are playing with real people, the Pokemon you get are still random, so it's a coin flip on whether or not they'll mesh well together at all. It is still fun though, and a handful of the legendaries can be a real challenge to beat. Zygarde's giving Necrozma a run for their money with how much trauma they caused. They are merciful enough to be guaranteed captures though, which really helps in this place breaking the game. So every legendary in here is level 70, well above even Leon's team, and since you use rentals here alongside the guaranteed catch chance, with the cherry on top of Peony's battle being optional, you're free to just grab a legendary from here as early as possible. And some people may think, well, what about the obedience system? But that just doesn't apply to Pokemon you've caught yourself, at least before Legends Arceus. So not even 2 hours into the story, you can just have a level 70 Suicune. Honestly, I don't think they cared that much. But that's not even the most beloved part of Dynamax Adventures, that instead being the shiny hunting. Every Pokemon you catch is a 1 in 300 chance of being shiny, becoming 1 in 100 each with a shiny charm, which is really good, especially for the legendaries. Now, Dynamax Adventures still do take a while with about 10 to 15 minutes per attempt, but it's still way more effective than soft resetting, that's for sure. Oh man, what were we doing? Oh right, Nia. She hasn't seen Peony yet, but does exposit a little bit about him. He used to be a gym leader, he wanted to bring her to check out the local legends, and she is not interested, so instead, we get to act as his daughter for a bit. Oh my god, he's dead! We give him the rundown on what's happening, and he's shockingly receptive and understanding about it. It's not often you see good fathers in Pokemon games, let alone 2. So it's time to start our adventure, with our first stop being a town called Freezington. I think that's the least creative town name in the series, and in Kanto, they're just called colors. And yeah, the place itself isn't much, but I like the atmosphere, being in this little clearing surrounded by trees. It has a pretty depressing vibe too, with the slow, solemn music. And as we meet with the mayor, he even tells us that there's hardly ever any visitors here, as they have nothing left. Just an old folktale that apparently isn't even true. It's a really unique take on the theme of a more run-down, dying town, especially for Pokemon. Less someone's doing rare candies in the back alley, and more clinging on to what little life it has left. But you can't fool me, I saw that red text. Guys, I think the King of Bountiful Harvests might be real. He even gives us a shirt emblazoned with the king's supposed appearance and points us to a statue of the king, which looks very different on account of missing its head. For now, Peony calls us over to his base, but I'd rather say hi to the townsfolk. How did you get this? Well, I guess it's best to not keep him waiting. Upon heading inside, Peony gives us a quick rundown of our itinerary. Number 1, the King of Bountiful Harvests. I think we've heard that one before. Number 2, a massive red tree where flying legendary Pokemon gather. And 3, some dot-faced giants. We also get our very own expedition uniform. Wow, I didn't know we were exploring a construction site. We're given some clues to go off of, featuring some wonderful illustrations by Peony. Look, that's just charming. Though he's most interested in the King of Bountiful Harvests, or as he puts it, the sacred bonds of Sovereign and Steed. And one last thing before we hit the road. Oh, for free, huh? Okay, well, maybe not free. And now we're pretty much free to do as we please. The Crown Tundra doesn't really have a story structure in the same way the Isle of Armor does. Sure, the King of Bountiful Harvest quest is the main one, but any of those other clues we got are available too, and also required for the ending. On top of that, the Crown Tundra has its own sort of Diglett quest, but significantly more impactful, with Sonia indeed being here trying to track down some legendary Pokemon by analyzing their footprints. And of course, by she does that, I mean we do that. Slight tangent, but starting this quest is kind of like the Diglett one, but worse. As expected, the tracks don't appear until you've seen her, but she only appears at the east exit of Freezington, so if you, God forbid, take the west one, you won't see her. At the very least, the Diglett guy's right in our path if we keep walking. Anyway, this DLC's freedom of choice makes it kind of hard to talk about in a video that's formatted like this. Like, sure, it's my playthrough of Sword and Shield, but primarily I want to talk about Sword and Shield. But I guess the best way to do it would just be to follow the order I went with. I mean, that is how most players would do it anyway, just mostly exploring and making progress as they go. And it helps that the Crown Tundra doesn't have much of a plot. It does have lore though, so ooh. All that being said, I still started with the main quest. During the cutscene when Peony talked about the King of Bountiful Harvests, the camera conspicuously panned over to this mess of polygons on the table, so it seems appropriate to check it out, and as it turns out, Peony just found it outside and immediately started using it as a pillow. Dude, that's gonna murder your sleep score. And since it's part of the legends, we take it and put it back on that statue outside, where it fades to black. Yeah, this DLC infamously has a lot of those fade to black moments again, but also some really well animated bits, so I guess it balances out. I wonder how many thoughts are in that big head. Hey, let's ask it ourselves. We head over and the first thing it wants is a fight. At least it has the courtesy to ask. It doesn't have the courtesy to tell us its name though, but come on, I've seen VGC, you're Calyrex. Strangely enough, just like the Peony fight earlier, you don't have to win this battle. Even if you lose, Calyrex will be satisfied and the plot continues as normal. I see, instead of having level scaling, you just don't have to do anything at all. Genius! Regardless of the outcome, the ruckus of battle does attract Peony though, leading to another of the most iconic parts of this DLC. Possession! Calyrex here used to rule over the tundra, providing bountiful harvests, as the legend says. But as time passed, the people in the tundra slowly started to forget about their traditions, and by extension Calyrex, thus causing it to lose its powers. And it's up to you to help out. Again, the story itself isn't long at all, but I really like it. Even on just a surface level without exploring the deeper lore, it feels like it actually expands on an idea the main game hardly touched on, that being legends and history getting lost to time. Back there, the story's not so much about how the dogs were forgotten and quite literally covered up, but instead about the legend itself and what happened on the darkest day. Like, I'm sorry, the Isle of Armor was great, but learning where Leon's Charmander came from doesn't exactly make up for all of this. Calyrex asks us to go confirm if Freezington's residents really did forget. It apparently tried asking itself a while back, but it put the villagers into a panic, and I would have loved to see that. But lots of them just call it a fairy tale from when they were kids. This guy's a hater, saying if it was real, the harvest would be, you know, bountiful. And this lady's doing nothing, so it's safe to say, yeah, Freezington has forgotten Calyrex. Okay, I would make some joke like they probably couldn't see it thanks to the pop-in. But no, Calyrex is perfectly visible from all the way over here, while Peony fades in and out like we'd expect by now. How does that even happen? We break the news to the guy that it looks like we're gonna have to restore their powers a different way. So the next best thing to try would be finding Calyrex's steed, which the mayor should be able to help us with. Calyrex flies off, giving Peony his body back, who then leaves. Sadly, Peony isn't really in this DLC that much. Granted, at some points he will call you on the phone, being as charming as ever, but a large majority of his actual on-screen presence is him being possessed by Calyrex. He's still fantastic and his lore runs shockingly deep. He just deserved more in the plot itself. Well, the mayor's not home, as we're told he stepped out into the wilds for a bit. And what a perfect excuse to start exploring the Crown Tundra. The first area, Slippery Slope, is indeed just a bad first impression. In fact, only the north half of the tundra is snowy, and even then there are parts of it that aren't. The northeast has a couple caves, and there's even this part on the right of the map that's kind of like Route 9, but more interesting, being a beach with a field of icebergs that you can water bike around. The rest of the map is a lot more plains-like, but not without its own flair. We see ruins and abandoned farming plots scattered around, there's a graveyard, the grass is more yellow, making it look almost dead, which is also some pretty great environmental storytelling, really showing us just how desolate the lands become without Calyrex's powers. And speaking of storytelling and environment. There's these pedestals that'll be important later, and there's also actual landmarks in the form of these temples and this giant tree that will also be important later. But layout-wise, overall, it's not as good as the Isle of Armor. The Crown Tundra is still really well designed and miles ahead of the wild area once again. Hell, it's easily the biggest of the 3 open zones, but it's missing the open, interconnected feel that the Isle of Armor has. Instead, it's kind of like there's 3 branches that split off from around here. One leads south to Dynatree Hill. The one that leads to the icebergs has a bit of a winding cave, but it still just connects these 2 points here. And the northern path is pretty much a straight shot to the summit. It also doesn't feel as tightly packed as some parts of the Isle of Armor. A lot more of the area is just large flat plains coming dangerously close to the wild area sometimes. It's not that bad, but it is still pretty noticeable. It's also kind of ironic how the Isle is so open with a really linear story, whereas the Tundra storyline is non-linear, but you have to navigate from point A to point B normally. And on topic of the non-linear story, we found a temple, and it looks pretty similar to one of Peony's drawings. And he must have heard that because he gives us a call and starts this quest proper. If we want to actually enter the temple though, we have to solve a classic Regi puzzle, which thankfully has no braille this time. Though this one can be confusing for entirely different reasons, purely because it requires the use of a mechanic that no one has ever thought of: whistling. By clicking in the left stick, you'll whistle, attracting some wild Pokemon to you. But it's almost always easier to just run into them yourself instead. In fact, I think there's only one time other than the temple where you're actually required to use it, and that's to get Emolga in the DLC. Man, I hope this becomes a mainstay. There is still a second puzzle before we can fight Registeel though, and that is to step on the floor tiles. It's your pretty standard legendary fight, but in this game, it's really refreshing because otherwise the only legendary you actually have to catch outside of the Crown Tundra is Zacian or Zamazenta. Now, catching legendaries is infamously frustrating, with the Regis here being no different, having a catch rate of 3. In fact, this seems like a good time to bring up that I lost a shiny Arceus once because it struggled to death, and this screenshot's the only proof I have left of it. Rest in piss. But that's just part of the fun! Anyway, I caught Registeel in like 2 balls, haha. Say hello to Igus. And say hello to the mayor, since he's not far from here. He pretty much says what we already know: the land's dying out and the Crown Tundra's on its last legs. He does know about the steed though and invites us back to his place to continue the conversation. But I'd rather keep exploring. And during our jaunt, bam, another temple. This one's certainly a lot fancier than the first one, so fancy in fact that we're not even allowed to enter until we have the other giants first. But in a gameplay and exploration sense, this is cool. Something we can look forward to coming back to. We are good enough for this other temple though, which says, let the first Pokemon hold a never-changing stone. And it's obviously telling you to give your Pokemon an Everstone, which isn't hard to find. Though I should clarify, even though these puzzles are easy, they are light years better than the Braille. Like, the Braille in hindsight is hilarious, but actually doing it? No, it's not fun. We do the pattern thing again, and this one was a shockingly quick catch too. Why the hell did I name it this? Look, I know Calyrex is waiting and the planet is kinda dying, but I don't know, exploring is just so fun. It really does feel like Scarlet and Violet in that sense, just having this big checklist of things to do. I also have undiagnosed ADHD, so let's check out that tree! Just a quick bike ride down a river, and we do indeed check it out with one of the best animated cutscenes just in the series. It's cinema. I don't know, it's just so lively and expressive, I love it so much! The strong expressions and snappiness on the player, the attacks Moltres and Zapdos fire at each other look great right before Articuno interrupts, they pose for a sick wallpaper right before your phone goes off with more great snappy animation, and then they scatter, prompting us to give chase. And according to Peony, they've scattered far. Zapdos is in the wild area, Moltres is on the Isle of Armor, and Articuno's here in the Crown Tundra. And with this officially being the start of our third quest, I guess we're doing roaming legendaries now. Though these roamers are hardly anything like the others in the series. And not just because of the game having overworld encounters now. Simply put, Sword and Shield's roaming legendaries actually don't suck ass. But that's not the only legendary thing about this tree. Those things up there seem like berries. And what do we do to berry trees in Galar? We shake them. Oh, the tree didn't like that. There's a secret battle against a level 90 Dynamax Greedent here, and it is a bit tough just by virtue of being a 1v1 against a level 90 Dynamax Greedent. It gives you a bunch of berries after the battle, and in a sense it could be considered a sort of super boss. The main game was really missing stuff like this, just small moments, extra side things to do. Like, it sucks that you could only catch Drifloon on Fridays, but it was a nice secret to have, you know? Okay, now to give chase. Articuno's making its way up Snowslide Slope, and we just leisurely follow it all the way up. Hey, you get down here! It ends up stopping at a ledge and has us play a guessing game, which I lost. Oh, bye. Yeah, the real one does a cry, spins real fast, and you have to touch it. If you touch a fake, it leaves. Oh hey, is that a temple down there? This temple asks us to walk together with a living crystal of snow. It's marginally more vague than before, but it's just asking you to put a cryogonal in the front of your party. And they are not hard to find either, they're everywhere around the tundra. No, seriously. We head on in, do the pattern, and summon Regice. All the Regis use a remix of their classic battle theme, as is tradition, and I think this is the most remixed track in the series, not counting obvious stuff like the Pokemon Center. There's the original, plus a remix in Platinum, Black and White 2, Oras, and here, and another in Masters. These guys get around. Still an easy catch, though. Back to the birds, you know what would make finding Articuno so much easier? Being able to look upward. I haven't mentioned it yet, but this is the first Pokemon game with full-on camera control. And oh boy, is it not very good! You just can't look up or down, really. It's a wide range of directly in front of you and maybe 30 degrees downwards. Really, it's not a problem in most cases, either because the terrain is mostly flat or there simply isn't much to look up for. But the Crown Tundra in particular, this place is pretty vertical thanks to the mountain. Hell, its side profile would probably look like stairs, but you can hardly look up the thing. You don't get to see the scale of this mountain unless you're far enough away at some pretty specific spots. And look, there's a huge withered tree up there too, looming over the region at all times. That is such a cool visual, almost giving off Mount Coronet energy. So it's too bad you almost never see it. And most of the times when you can, it's unceremoniously squished right at the top of the screen. And if this camera can't even look slightly up a mountain, there's no way it can track Articuno flying overhead, so screw it, I'm going for Zapdos. It's just standing there. Menacingly, some might say. This chase is way more straightforward than the Articuno one because that's all it is, a chase. It runs along a set path, so if you cut enough corners and keep boosting on your bike, you'll catch up eventually. And they have a pretty good, very frantic, brand new battle theme. You'd probably expect a remix of the Kanto battle theme or something, but no, a whole new piece. And you know what else comes in pieces? Hail! It got killed by hail. Luckily, getting roaming legendaries, or legendaries in general, to respawn in this game is way easier than past entries. Instead of having to refight the champion, defend your title, or give up if you're playing a game before Platinum, you just have to leave the area and come back. Which obviously is infinitely more convenient, especially considering I killed it again. Third time's the charm, and after just a bit of a struggle, we catch it. There's still not much faith for Articuno, so let's try Moltres next. And Moltres sucks! Zapdos' path is really straightforward and just covers this half of the first part of the wild area. Articuno actually just flies between two set points until you do its minigame right. And this creature, it flies around an entire half of the Isle of Armor. And when I say half, I'm including the water. So for a majority of the chase, the controls feel like they were dipped in honey, all while Sharpedo's breathing down your neck. And in order to get this guy to come down and actually fight you, you have to cut them off in front. And it's not like Zapdos, who's slightly slower than your boosting speed. Moltres is always faster than you. Now, cutting in front of it shouldn't be that hard, just cut a few corners. But this thing has the most unorthodox flying pattern ever, so you'll probably need to take at least a couple laps around the island to get a hang of it. But finally, once you do get its attention, oh damn Sharpedo, then comes catching it. It has Nasty Plot. It will stack it. It will start to shred through your entire team. It took me down to just Gadogity, so I had to make a calculated decision. Yeah, no, it is not worth doing that chase again. And when it comes to Articuno, it's really just waiting for it to finally land. But it does, and we catch it, thus finishing the first of our adventures. Each time you finish an adventure, you have to report back to Peony, since that is how you finish the game, and he has unique comments for all of them. Notably, he mentions how the Galarian Birds hardly resemble the Cantonian Birds, and that's something I really like about them. The original Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres have absolutely no lore unless you count the Lugia movie, and if you do that, don't talk to me. But these ones are heavily implied to be completely separate Pokemon. They just got their names from having somewhat similar traits like Zapdos' feet sounding like a thunderclap. It's a really cool concept, kind of like Convergent Pokemon before we actually got Convergent Pokemon. It also explains why Galarian Moltres looks frankly nothing like it used to. All that rubber chicken energy just gone. And while we're at it, let's check off another quest. We have the 3 Regis, or at least the 3 classic Regis, so now we can make our way back to that fancy temple. This one's actually really neat. If you just fill in the entire floor as we've been doing, that won't work. Instead, you have to fill in one of 2 very specific patterns, with the game graciously giving you an oh-so-subtle hint before you enter. Now, the sucky part is being forced to choose. Depending on how you fill in the pattern, you get either Regieleki or Regidrago, thus meaning you do have to trade for the other one. At least the presentation is cool, it's not just a menu. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but mid-editing, I discovered something. And I don't know where else to put it, but I think it fits well here. So it's kind of weird how the DLC gives you the option to choose these things, right? When the main game didn't do anything like that. You know if these Regis and different Urshifu were in the base game, they'd be version locked. And I have a theory that was originally intended to be the case. Take a look and listen to this clip from the reveal of the Sword and Shield expansion pass.
One for Pokemon Sword, and one for Pokemon Shield. Different Pokemon will appear in the different versions, and you'll also run into some different people and places.
This is not true. The versions do have different Pokemon, that's a given. And hey, there is a character who swaps out based on if you're playing Sword or Shield, but different places? No. The maps are identical between versions, but the Towers of Two Fists and Split Decision Ruins very well could have been intended to be version locked, thus making the claim of different places true. Now, is there any hard proof of this? No, but it's still an interesting thing to think about. And no matter what the original intent was, their final decision to actually let the player have agency was certainly for the best. Anyway, I go for Regieleki since according to the decks, it can generate all of Galar's electricity and I just want to spite Sherman Rose. Haha, dumbass is in jail for nothing. The fight's as standard as ever, so we catch it and report back to Peony. But while that is it for this quest, it's not it for the Regis. If you have Regirock, Ice, Steel, Alecki, and Drago on your team and head to this conspicuous raid den in Giant's Bed, you can do a raid battle with a level 100 Regigigas, and it pairs quite well with the level 1 from Platinum. Now, it does suck that this is locked behind either trading or multiple playthroughs, but come on, it's Regigigas, you weren't going to use it anyway. Oh, you know, this entire time we were supposed to be helping a king regain its powers to restore a dying land, so we should probably get back to that, yeah. We join the mayor in his home, but he can't seem to remember much about Calyrex's steed. So to make things easier, he just gives us full access to his bookshelf. Ah, excellent taste. There's books all about the king, the steed, the Reins of Unity, and the Freezington Snow Samba? That sounds fun, you can't blame me for getting distracted again. Okay, for real, we start reading. The king could bring life back to the land easily, as we know. The king's steed used to be unruly and destructive before being tamed, and conflicting stories say it was either black as midnight or white as a block of ice. But that distinction has also been lost to time. The Reins of Unity bound the king to their steed, making them essentially one being. But thanks to the reins being made by the humans, using a magical flower and hair from the horse, the reins also represented the unity between them and the king. And the creation of the reins was tradition before it wasn't. The king's steed apparently loves special carrots, shade root carrots grown where people died, and ice root carrots grown in the snow. But even that detail has faded away. Despite being a lore dump in the form of a text wall in the most literal possible way, this is a pretty cool part, very reminiscent of Canalave Library, albeit less optional. Though if you're really in a hurry, you only need to read about the crops to progress the game. But Snow Samba! It's fun to learn about Pokemon lore more in depth like this. Something like this really should have been in the base game. What if the vault had a library or something in it? And in a sense, this is kind of like the league card thing where you're forced to read through a bunch of paragraphs to understand the story. But even if you cut this part out entirely, you would still know what's going on. Damn it, I said no more, Marnie. After our reading session, we get called back over to the Calyrex corner, and Peony is also there. We mentioned the carrots, so now all we need is the carrots. There's just a man in Freezington who will give you the carrot seeds in exchange for 8 pieces of Dynite ore, which is not hard to get at all. If you're even slightly lucky, you'd already be all set from the mandatory Dynamax adventure. I wasn't. And if you happen to have already bought the carrots before this cutscene, Calyrex will surprisingly take notice immediately. You'd expect, like in other Pokemon games, or games in general really, that you'd start the quest, fade out, and have to talk to the guy again. Calyrex grabs their Monado and has a vision of 2 fields in the tundra, one being in a snowy area and the other being in a graveyard. Whoa, it's just like the book! And this is another thing we get to choose, with where we plant the carrot seeds giving us either Glastrier or Spectrier. And it's stuff like this that really goes to show we do not need 2 versions. Like back in the base game where the player and Hop pick up the hero's relics, that so easily could have just been an option. Oh, but you know why they can't do that. Same reason BDSP outsold Legends Arceus. I personally went for Spectrier because come on, look at that edge! Calyrex manages to follow us, somehow with Peony in tow, and we're treated to another big talking point surrounding this game's cutscenes. Plant the carrot, fade to black. Then suddenly the animation skyrockets with Calyrex using their powers in the form of this dance. Peony has his own moves here too, it's animated shockingly well. But then the carrot just pops in, and we yank it out by once again fading to black. I don't want to say they didn't try, because that's not fair. Lots of the animations in this game look great, but they only half-tried sometimes. At least they're not the only game that does this. Persona 3 Reload, I love you, but why did you scrap this animation? We have the carrot now, and its mere presence in the world makes Spectrier show up. Oh yeah, by the way, it's heading for Freezington, where it's likely to destroy the place and kill people as it's historically done. Oopsies! So we rush back to the village and... I'm not seeing an issue here. Oh, never mind, we're fighting now. Not that the fight's hard or anything, but considering the battle music keeps playing, it appears we're not done yet. It's about to trample this woman before Calyrex does... this, and diverts the horse elsewhere. The moment afterwards is pretty sweet where the lady says she feels like something stepped in to save her. It's just a one-off line, but it's a subtle way to show their faith coming back to the King of Bountiful Harvests. It's neat. And it looks like among all the chaos, it drops some hair. Then the mayor comes in. He sees the hair from the horse. He saw the horse.
Peter,
The horse is here.
And he knows that the horse's hair is used to make the Reins of Unity alongside a Radiant Blossom, and yet he's still like, oh no, in this world of living snowflakes and sentient keys, I draw the line at the horse being real. His family's actually the one that passed down how to make the reins, which he doesn't remember. Hey, remember that lady that had a Cosmog in her house? Well, she gives it to us now after saving the village from Spectrier, and that's cool. Its evolution is dependent on the version with Sword getting Solgaleo and Moon getting Lunala, and that kinda stings, but the two of them can very easily just be obtained from Dynamax Adventures. If anything, this Cosmog's really just a way to get a Cosmoem above all else. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Since the mayor isn't helping at all, let's reconvene with Calyrex again. I do like how Calyrex realizes the reason people stopped making the reins was because Calyrex stopped making the flowers they needed for them. Again, a parallel with the base game, but this one's inversed. Instead of history being seemingly deliberately covered up, Calyrex and the residents just happen to drift apart. Nobody's really at fault here, something Calyrex learns to accept. And just now, thanks to the whole horse incident, if I see any JoJo references in the comments, I swear to God, the residents have started to believe in Calyrex again a tiny bit more. Just enough to give Calyrex enough power to make the flower for the reins, or at least a petal of it. And the petal has a very distinct blue glow. In fact, Calyrex glows blue when it Dynamaxes instead of the standard red. And I think this is a pretty good time to go into Calyrex's surprisingly extensive lore. So remember those pedestals scattered around the Crown Tundra? Well, those actually go a bit more in depth into Calyrex's backstory. The first time the villagers saw it, it was wounded. They took Calyrex in, cared for its wounds, and so as thanks, it used its power, a dazzling blue light, to bring life back to the land. And only then did the villagers start to call it a king. Before that, it was just another Pokemon. Then blah blah blah, the horse thing happens. But the most important part is the beginning. What was Calyrex wounded by? And this kind of goes into fan theory territory, but it all lines up so well. And some of these elements just don't have an official explanation otherwise, so let's put on our tinfoil hats just this once. Shadow Rider Calyrex's shield dex entry says that years ago, it saved the creatures of the forest from a meteorite strike. And Eternatus, and consequently Dynamax Energy as a whole, apparently also came to Earth in a meteorite. Now, meteorites are a surprisingly common thing in this franchise. Like, Calyrex might have saved those creatures from a Clefairy for all we know. But the difference here is that we know, or at least can infer, where Eternatus landed. And that's the max lair. When talking to Peonia in there, she has a chance to say that there might be a giant wishing star down there or something that causes all the Dynamaxing. And we've seen wishing stars fall to the earth like meteors, so Eternatus likely landed in the Crown Tundra where Calyrex was as well. And this next part is even more just a theory, but hey, that hasn't stopped us before. Calyrex's wounds likely came from its battle with Eternatus, and that blue glow in it Dynamaxes might mean that it doesn't need Eternatus' energy for it. So then that sparks another question. Why does Calyrex, a seemingly random legendary, have this power that's otherwise exclusive to the Darkest Day itself? That part, we don't really know. Calyrex could potentially be an equal to Eternatus, but that's all we really get. Internally, it's even grouped together with all the other box art legends. This guy's kind of like Galar's Terapagos, but infinitely more mysterious. Well, for now, I guess we have to wait for Legends Stonejourner. We'll surely learn something then. Anyway, we have what we need for the Reins of Unity, but the mayor has made it abundantly clear that he does not know how to make them. Well, he at least tries, and if you try, anything can be possible. It didn't work. Our day has been positively ruined. Look at this. But luckily, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We fill him in on what just happened, so in response, he casually makes the Reins of Unity. Yeah, the DLC story really is just a framing device for the gameplay. This is so unserious, and yet it is so perfect. Peony just has an impeccable sewing ability. Male wife. The two of us step outside and, oh come on, we were talking! At least this is important. Calyrex found Spectrier at the Crown Shrine, located at the very top of the mountain. You know, remember that big tree? It really is Mount Coronet. And even according to one of those pedestals, that temple was built to be Calyrex's home, which is ultimately an unnecessary but very small and welcome detail. They head up there to wait for us, but there is still one legend to solve before we wrap this up once and for all. While exploring the Crown Tundra, you're bound to find most, if not all of the Pokemon tracks for Sonia just naturally. It seems daunting with there not only being 3 different kinds, them not only being small and blending into the ground, but also having to find 50 tracks per type, meaning 150 total. But in practice, it is way easier than the Diglett quest. A majority of the tracks are grouped together, like take the area around the Frigid Sea. You can get most, if not all of the tracks for the Iron Will Pokemon just in that area. Just on this elevated piece of land here, you can easily find over half of its tracks. Really begs the question of what the hell it was doing there, huh? Virizions tracks are probably the hardest, spanning across the widest area and also being green so they blend in just a bit more, but it's still more than manageable. And in case that wasn't enough, there's more tracks in the map than is required to finish the quest, so you don't even have to get all of them. Once we report our collected data back to Sonia, who does a thing, she tells us where they are, which is around where their tracks primarily were. The grassland Pokemon can be found in Giant's Bed. Yeah, that narrows it down. I went for Terrakion first in Lakeside Cave, and it's just kind of hanging out there. No special music or anything, just the normal wild battle theme. We really should weaken it just a bit more, so I love saving the game. We do find Virizion in the giant's bed, and it's located around this area, so you're welcome. And last comes Cobalion out of the frigid sea, caught without issue. So we quickly report back to Sonia, and she is just over the moon. Don't know why she was researching them when they have nothing to do with Dynamax, but shh, we can let her have this. We get some EXP candies and that juicy lore about how they'd fight against evil humans in the past, and them coming back might be a sign of them trusting humanity again. That kinda parallels Calyrex's story in a sense. That's neat. Terrible decision on their part, though. And she's out of here, never to be seen again unless you like gambling. Whose Beldam is this? But that's not it for the Swords of Justice, because Keldeo exists. It's catchable in the Crown Tundra too, but way more tucked away than the others. So, if you've played the game, you may have seen this small island in Bolomir Lake. There's not much here, just a TR for Energy Ball. But if you look closer, you'll notice a cooking pot. And next to the pot is another set of completely unique Pokemon tracks. And that is all we have to work off of. Sonia doesn't say anything about this. The Pokédex doesn't say anything about this. You can't even interact with the pot. Well, what we're expected to do is have Terrakion, Cobalion, and Virizion in our party and make curry. And once that's done and we exit camp, it's just there. This kind of stuff is so cool. If they're going to keep making mythicals natively available in the games, as they've been doing lately, they should really keep up this super cryptic stuff. It's not only fitting considering the Pokemon themselves and their legacy. No, I promise you, the truck has to mean something. And no, I haven't talked to a therapist, how could you tell? But it's also fun to see the community rack their brains on how to get them. The Indigo Disc had Meloetta as its version of Keldeo, cryptic to get with nobody finding it until like a week after the DLC came out, and it was really fun there too. Hell, in Sword and Shield's files, there's an unused Victini encounter, so who knows, maybe we just haven't found it yet. Well, that was all of the other legends, so there's no distractions left. It's finally time for our trek up to the Crown Shrine. And what a trek it is! At the top of Snowslide Slope, we enter the tunnel to the top. And while, again, it's not too complex because this is Pokemon Sword and Shield, in fact, it's pretty much another straight shot. But in-game, while playing it, it feels so windy and vast, with tons of drop-offs and changes in elevation. And there's a small part with cracks in the wall that let you look across the entire tundra, almost like you're reflecting on your journey. Now, I do wish it looked a lot more distinct. Both the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra do have a lot of identity as areas, but that doesn't reflect in their caves? Like, which one of these 3 caves is tunnel to the top? Trick question, they're all Courageous Cavern. There are 6 caves total between the Tundra and Isle, but they're all just rocky and brown. I guess Courageous Cavern does have the crevices and the view out the side, and Brawler's Cave is a bit more spacious with a river running through it. Oh, and there's also Warm-Up Tunnel, which sucks, but that's nothing compared to, say, Meteor Falls or Reversal Mountain. Like, a volcano dungeon would have been perfect on the Isle of Armor, even if the Isle of Man in real life doesn't quite have one, but you know. And hey, speaking of the Isle of Man, it's also worth noting that the Crown Tundra is also based on a real-life place, that being Scotland. But you wouldn't be able to tell that. Geographically, considering Galar is Great Britain but upside down, the Crown Tundra is in the same location as Scotland, and this has been directly confirmed by some official sources. But the Crown Tundra itself? No, that's not Scotland. Like, at least when they did New York, they remembered to include the giant castles. Hell, here's proof, look, I was there. And at the end of the cave lies the path to the peak, the final stretch, and pretty much just a straight shot. How poetic, it all ends with a bunch of trees, and you doubted them before. Well, here we are, the Crown Shrine. And it seems Calyrex is already here. And Peony, who hasn't had his body back in a couple hours, sorry. We hand over the Reins of Unity, place the carrot in the basket, and wait in hiding. And the wait was worth it because there's another really nice cutscene here. After a bit of a struggle, Calyrex tames Spectrier and they finally get their full power back, and Peony's finally here to actually experience it alongside us. I love this guy, I just wish he actually got to be with us more, oh god damn it! And as if everything we already did wasn't enough, Calyrex wants us to prove our worth. They guide Peony back home, which is impressive considering all the Frostmoth outside, and we have at her. You know, something really neat this game does is show you your own face during intense battles. It happened all the way back with Zamazenta and Hop, and I don't know, it's a really tiny thing, but it's almost reminiscent of the stuff like the Elite Four battle intros in Gen 4, just adding that extra bit of intensity. Now, Calyrex Shadow Rider. It's not just competitive where this guy's a menace. Level 80, and as such, its Astral Barrage takes out Mother 3 immediately. I don't know, maybe Afton outspeeds? Oh, never mind. This fight is tough. Every time Shadow Rider Calyrex gets a KO, Grimnay activates boosting its special attack. So that quickly snowballing is very likely. I mean, Calyrex is essentially the final boss. And as such, I'm down to my last Pokemon. And Rashes has no chance of outspeeding. But maybe, just maybe, through the power of... thank you, Professor Magnolia, for coming in clutch. Oh, also, you're not Calyrex anymore. You're Calories. I look forward to all the adventures we may have together. Okay, now who wants to break the news to them that the game is done? Catching Calyrex was never our true goal, though. It was to have an adventure. And as Peony says, it's not over until we make it back home safe. We report the King of Bountiful Harvests, thus bringing our adventure to a close. It's really bittersweet, and Peony even gives us his rare league card, a perfect chance to talk about him more. He is such a fun character, but also really tragic. We already learned that he used to be a gym leader from way back, but this card also reveals that he's Rose's younger brother. Though we totally could have inferred that. They look similar, both have Copperajah as their ace, they're both flowers. Peony was compared a lot to Rose when he was younger, so he ran away from home, thus becoming a gym leader in the process. He even made it to the champion spot, but as soon as Rose became chairman, Peony was completely wiped off the Pokemon League. But he didn't let that define him, and now he's working to give Nia and, spoilers, even Penny the great childhood he never had. I love him! Anyway, Nia comes back from the Max Lair, finally ready to give the Adventure a chance. Uh-oh, Peony mentions coming up with new legends. She is not having it, so she heads back to the Max Lair, this time with Peony following suit. And with that, the end. Or is it? No. Upon trying to step out the door, we're greeted with another legendary clue. Oh, that's an ultra wormhole in the Galar region. I guess we know where the Cosmog came from, which is a really weird but neat way to foreshadow this. But whatever it means, it is another legendary clue, so we show it to Peony and he's not familiar. You know, the Pokemon multiverse is so funny because literally anything can be a cop-out if the writers want it to be. Mega Evolution Timeline versus non-Mega Evolution Timeline, who cares? Look, it's Nihilego. You know, we're probably not supposed to care. Suddenly, a bunch of trainers run out of the Max Lair, claiming they saw creatures, and they're not even sure if they're Pokemon. Thus commencing our true final adventure. And this one blows. I mean, more content's more content, and luckily this is completely optional. The Ultra Beasts start spawning as legendaries in the Max Lair, and once you catch 5 of them, you can face off against Necrozma, ending the adventure. And it is easy enough to do, but Dynamax Adventures are at their most fun when you're just doing them in the background or shiny hunting. They're really not engaging enough to be the premise of a whole mission. You're not even guaranteed to find an Ultra Beast down there. Peonia can kind of help, since she has a chance to tell you about a specific Pokemon, thus letting you choose to go for it. But at most, that's still unreliable. Like, it took me a solid 3 hours of nothing but Dynamax Adventures, and I'm sorry it wasn't fun. Though you do get gifted a Poipole out of it, even though it's shiny locked, because of course it is. And that's pretty much it for the Crown Tundra. Nia can randomly give you some accessories, which is cool. Namely Lysander's futuristic shades and Ghetsis' futuristic monocle if you want to get beat up. You can rematch Peony in the lair, which is always nice. Plus, you have an option to just show him any of the legendaries you caught in the Max Lair, and he has unique dialogue for every single one. No clue why they spent their precious development time writing all this, but hey, it's certainly charming. We unlock an endless mode for Dynamax Adventures, where you get tons of Dynite ore to buy rare items, but you also can't keep any of the Pokemon you catch, so what is the point? And lastly, similar to the secret Marnie cutscene in the base game, there's a short scene with Oleana in the old cemetery, but it appears only at night, and on top of that, completely randomly? Some people claim you have to see this specific piece of dialogue from Peonia first, but even then that doesn't seem to guarantee it. And even then, the scene is just pretty unsubstantial. So she's there because apparently Chairman Rose was sighted in the tundra. Then Peony shows up and she goes, "Oh, Rose! Oh wait, no, you're Rose's brother." And then starts to call Peony undignified, which is unacceptable. Then after Oleana takes her leave, Peony reminisces about Rose really quick, and that's all. You don't exactly get anything out of this cutscene, but even just this one line from Peony is so interesting to see. It would be really neat to have Rose and Peony interact, but maybe that not happening is for the best. Oh yeah, and Oleana was here too. And that's it for the Crown Tundra. But not quite it for the expansion pass. That's right, we've got a proper Mochi Mayhem on our hands. Okay, maybe not that far. After simply stepping out of the Max Lair after starting the Ultra Beyond adventure, we get a call from Leon asking us to head to Winden Stadium for something. Certainly this wasn't foreshadowed earlier. And I guess this part of the DLC could be compared to the Hidden Treasure of Area Zero part of, well, the Hidden Treasure of Area Zero, in the sense that after the 2 main DLC stories are done, you head back to the main region for almost an epilogue of sorts. And despite both this and the trip to Area Zero kind of coming out of nowhere and not connecting well to the DLC at large, there's still a nice way to tie everything together, quite literally the cherry on top. And I might even say that this final segment here is better than the trip to Area Zero. So we make our way over, and there he is, alongside everyone else. Piers, Hop, all the gym leaders. Even Avery turns up, but not Klara because of my shitty life choices. And he's finally proven himself and become a psychic gym leader now. In the minor division? I really wish this game explored that kind of stuff more. And sure, maybe the different leagues are really only mentioned to further parallel the real-world soccer. But either way, we're presented with the idea of there being even more gyms, and all we have to see for it is their uniforms. So they're damn lucky they look really good. But for now, Leon announces that the Galarian Star Tournament is now on. But what is it? Well, it's as Leon says, essentially a multi-battle tournament. And that doesn't sound all too impressive. Because, in all honesty, it really isn't, but it's pretty neat in execution. First step is to choose our partner, which doesn't mean much when Hop's the only option on our first run-through. But after that, during rematches, you get to choose whatever partner you want, provided you unlock them. Again, almost everyone's here, ranging from your rivals to all the gym leaders to Leon, Peony, Mustard. They even let Swordward and Shieldbert in. Why would they do that? Okay, well, I know why. It's because they're the ones sponsoring the tournament. Why would they do that? And they all have their own set teams, which is something to consider when choosing to fight with them. Although Hop and Mustard are just kind of the best choices here. Hop has his legendary dog, which in my case is Zacian, so I win. And Mustard uses Urshifu, which is Urshifu. And since this isn't counted as a battle facility, your levels aren't set, so it's way too easy to just steamroll everything. But really, the Galarian Star Tournament isn't about the challenge, it's about the charm. All of your potential partners have quite a bit of unique dialogue for fighting alongside you. And on top of that, they even have dialogue with each other. Just as you can pair up with anyone, you can also end up fighting anyone. Now, the pairs are somewhat predetermined, like Kabu can only fight alongside Milo, Nessa, or Peony, but that's likely just down to all the unique dialogue they have with each other, which is still really nice to see. Just making this mostly great cast that tiny bit better. And the preset pairs don't even really feel like a hindrance because there's a lot of unexpected duos here. Like there's an interaction between Opal and Hop. Peony can partner up with Leon, Alistair and Mustard, and among all these different pairings, Marnie and Beats still don't have one together. I mean, now there's a third example of them being on screen at the same time at least, but till the bitter end there were 0 words exchanged between these two characters. You've gotta respect that. But yeah, overall, this tournament is a pretty great send-off to the game. Hop and I sweep through it pretty quick thanks to, I'll admit, cheating. Leon announces that the Galarian Star Tournament will continue on forever, and the credits roll one final time.
That's the game.
You know what? For once, the fans were right. The Crown Tundra is fantastic. Sure, with 2 more open world games releasing after it, it doesn't feel as special as it once did, but it still adds its own spark. Truly being able to do practically anything in any order, with the variety to keep it interesting too. Paired with likable characters and genuinely interesting lore, with 2 really fun and unique bonus side modes on top of all of that. The Crown Tundra isn't just another Sword and Shield 2.0 like the Isle of Armor could feel like sometimes. No, this is, 3.0. But all that being said, because there always needs to be a but in this franchise, I'm honestly really conflicted about the Pokemon Sword and Shield expansion pass as a whole. Now, the Isle of Armor, Galarian Star Tournament, and Crown Tundra are great. In fact, I'll say that Crown Tundra alone is just flat out a great piece of Pokemon content. But the DLC is held back by being a DLC. A DLC for Sword and Shield. Now, obviously, it's not an unpopular opinion to say that the DLC should have been in the base game. Heck, I think you could make that argument for most pieces of DLC, or at the very least the smaller ones. But in this case, it flat out needed to be in the base game, and I'm not just talking about the quality of life editions, which, yeah, why do I have to pay $40 for that? It's the best part of Sword and Shield in my opinion. Sure, the story isn't as grand, but honestly, I think the DLC stories, as simple as they are handled way better. There's the word variety again, something painfully missing from base Sword and Shield's story. Maybe the shorter runtime just gives them less of a chance to fumble? The exploration, again, fantastic! The Isle and the Tundra are what the wild area should have been! And I can say relatively confidently that Sword and Shield's DLC brings the game up from a C all the way to a solid A. But the DLC shouldn't carry that responsibility. If I need to buy an expansion pass to make the game finally good, that's not good. Scarlet and Violet's expansion pass, even though it's pricier, feels a lot less insulting in a way. Looking past the performance at least, because this isn't just insulting, this is offensive. But it genuinely feels like it's adding on to the base game. A great extra story with new stuff to do, but it's by no means required because Scarlet and Violet already had a great story and fine enough gameplay loop. And Sword and Shield's DLC still doesn't fix what's very much broken. This is a case where I would have vastly preferred a third version or something. It would have given them a second chance at making Galar instead of just tacking stuff onto what's already there and not done. And as it is now, all of Pokemon Sword and Shield's fantastic ideas are just stuck in this story that never got to and probably never will reach its full potential. I'm depressed now. Sword and Shield do indeed have a lot of merits, but also a lot of pitfalls. Was it fair for these to be the turning point for people where they say they lost their faith in the franchise? I wouldn't say so. This isn't some brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl level of not caring. This isn't a game with 0 effort. This doesn't feel like they're phoning it in necessarily. What it does feel like is that there were development troubles that we don't fully know about. It's obvious, or at least I think it's pretty clear, that the final Pokemon Sword and Shield were absolutely not what they were supposed to be. I bet you the team wanted to do something way more grand, but for one reason or another, the big thing probably being the switch to home console development without properly accounting for it, they weren't able to pull it off. Now, the lack of transparency and flat-out lies before the game release was, yeah, that was still bad, and base Sword and Shield is still a pretty disappointing, content-lacking slog to get through. But I don't know, mainly thanks to the DLC, I can't bring myself to hate this game. Fully hate this game, at least.
Yeah, that's all mainly thanks to Klara.